Welcome to School for Relationships. By tuning into this series on enmeshment and learning more about how to set boundaries and why they matter, you have embarked upon a process called individuation. And individuation in psychology is also sometimes called differentiation. This is the process of developing our own separate and unique sense of identity, recognizing our needs and feelings, and accepting the ways that we are different from others. Carl Jung, one of the first psychologists to really define individuation, describes it as a process of embracing our innermost and incomparable uniqueness, which he says involves becoming one's own self, or coming to selfhood and self-realization. In and outside of relationships, individuation increases our physical and mental well-being, and it's one of the biggest factors that predicts resilience and how well we cope with stress and adversity. Individuating is not the same thing as embracing individualism, and it doesn't mean we're chasing an impossible ideal of self-sufficiency. Individuation is just what helps us experience intimacy with others while maintaining a distinct sense of ourselves. And it actually allows us to connect with others on a deeper and more authentic level and have more reciprocal and mutually fulfilling relationships. Because if we aren't able to be and express ourselves in relationships, we're not actually really connecting with that other person or even fully represented in that relationship. So individuating is one of the most generous and loving gifts that we can give to our loved ones because it means we're learning how to take responsibility for our needs and feelings. And this doesn't mean we need to meet all of our own needs by ourselves. It just means that we're voicing and asking for what we need instead of unconsciously making other people responsible for this. Individuation also helps us attune to others' needs and feelings without taking them personally, calmly approach conflict, and look for solutions that meet everyone's needs. One of the most inspiring things for me is seeing people who have individuated and who are continuing to do that, who embrace their quirkiness and their own unique preferences, people who are able to follow what feels good for them and change their minds or change course as many times as they need to. And the people that I'm thinking of who are some of my personal role models are open and dedicated to growing more and more into themselves throughout their lifetime. For these people, this isn't about reaching any specific outcome or goal or getting anyone else's approval or validation. It's truly a process that's about finding and following what feels joyful for them. So as beautiful and wholesome as individuation may sound, this is a messy process. Individuation starts with letting go of perfectionism or the ideal that there is any one right or better way to be. And some of us who are born into boundaried and supportive families get to start this process as teenagers as we rebel and test out who we are and who we want to be with the support of our families. But many of us did not have this space and support to engage in the process of self-differentiation while we were still living with and dependent on our parents. For many of us, individuation is a pool we are just now dipping our toes into as adults. And this process can feel really anxiety-provoking and overwhelming at first if enmeshed relationships are all we've ever known. But it is a process that we can begin at any age and life stage. As adults seeking to individuate, we at least have the benefit of our brains being fully developed around age 25. And we also oftentimes have access to more helpful resources, maybe including therapy, and can make choices for ourselves that would have been impossible for us when we were still dependent on our families as children. So regardless of when individuation happens in our lives, this process involves significant growing pains, testing of boundaries, others and our own, and facing a lot of confusion and even pain as we differentiate and separate ourselves from even the people closest to us in the process of becoming our own self, our own unique person. So how do we begin this process of individuation? We develop a clearer sense of who we are by testing this out and trying things that don't fit at first, especially, getting many things about ourselves wrong. Just as we see with many teenagers, this first phase may involve going through a lot of different mood swings. We may be just learning how to express ourselves, so we might express ourselves in more abrupt and aggressive ways. We may act more self-preoccupied and still react really defensively to anything that challenges us. And we also often struggle with feeling way more self-conscious at first as our self-awareness is growing. So as scary as some of these first phases of individuation may sound, living our whole lives with an undifferentiated sense of self is like living trapped in a state of perpetual adolescence. So the question is, would you rather begin this process now and embrace some initial intensity and uncertainty with the knowledge that you are intentionally choosing how you engage in this process? Or would you rather keep dealing with these same issues and behavioral patterns in a milder but prolonged and less conscious or intentional way for potentially the rest of your life? If you feel ready to intentionally embark on this process, the most important thing to remember is that individuation is a process of trial and error. Again, this is a process of seeking to understand ourselves, and it's an ongoing process with no final destination. Remaining open to this process means we'll often continue to surprise ourselves for the rest of our lives. But as we've seen in some of the studies I shared in my last video on this idea of good enough parenting, we don't need to know what we're feeling and perfectly guess our own needs all of the time. Just like we saw that our parents don't need to show up for us perfectly and attune to us perfectly in order for us to develop secure attachment with them. All we need is to continue trying to understand and attune to ourselves. And just as we saw with those studies on good enough parenting, even if we only get our needs and feelings right 1/3 of the time, putting in this consistent effort to understand and respect our own needs is how we build self-trust, confidence, and security. In my next video, we'll go deeper into specific strategies on how you can heal from enmeshment and embrace this process of individuation in a way that's bringing you closer to yourself and increasing the intimacy in your relationships. So if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel and tune back in for the next videos on a deeper dive of how we individuate and heal from blurry boundaries.